Oh, look at that. It's a Honda CRZ. I wonder if it's a manual or automatic. Oh my God, let's see. Oh yes, it's a classic automatic.
Hey.
And welcome back to Janky AF. Here we have a 2016 Honda CRZ. I'm very, very excited to drive this car. Thank you so much for Jim, my neighbor, for letting me take it for a cruise. Now the Honda CRZ, if you know what it is, you already know. CRZ actually stands for the Compact Renaissance Zero. And there were several concept versions of this vehicle that sort of teased everybody. And Renaissance obviously is hearkening back to the CRX, which is a very, very lauded car in Honda's history. A tiny little compact hatchback that was sporty. And so there was a lot of hoopla around this car. There was a lot of expectations, quite frankly, around this car. And in a lot of people's eyes, it was disappointing. But I'm here to tell you already, after having only driven it for 5 minutes and just reading a lot about it, that I think it's actually a really, really great car. And it is starting to get kind of its due. It's starting to get appreciated. It's starting to become a modern classic. And the big knock against it was that it wasn't powerful enough. And in a lot of ways, it's exactly like my Fiat X19. It's got great styling. It's a very unique car, and certainly one of the only cars in its class. It kind of has a class unto itself. But a lot of people just didn't like it because they thought it was very, very underpowered. And they actually did come out with a couple Mugen versions of this in Japan. In Japan in 2010, this was actually awarded the Car of the Year when it debuted. And they sold a lot more of them. They got a ton of pre-orders. I'll have to look at the numbers exactly, but I believe the amount of cars that were pre-ordered in Japan was as many cars as was sold for like the first 2 or 3 years in the US when it came out a couple years later in around 2012. So I would be interested to know what the Japanese market thought of this car, apart from the sales figures, which kind of speak for themselves and the anticipation around it. In terms of actual speed, an early Japanese version was tested around 10 seconds, 0 to 60, and then Road and Track, I guess, got it down to 8.3 somehow. Now, when it did come to the US market, it was beefed up a little bit. I believe it has a 0.6 kilowatt hour battery, which is hilarious when you think of the battery sizes in modern electric cars, 80, 90 kilowatt hours. And it has a 1.5 liter 4-cylinder engine, makes around 111 horsepower by itself, and the combined figure, when you factor in the motor and the engine, is around I believe 130 to 140 horsepower and around 140 pound-feet of torque with the manual transmission, and 128, I believe, with the CVT, which this has. Now this is an automatic transmission, CVT, continuously variable transmission, and this was only the third car that Honda ever offered as a hybrid with a manual transmission. Now, if you go on Car Gurus or some website like that, you will see that there's almost twice as many or 3 times as many automatics out there than manuals, which is very weird because now the manual is so lusted after. The manual was actually the base option. It was actually cheaper than getting the automatic. But as we go on and talk about this car more, I think the automatic actually makes a lot of sense for this car, because I think what this car is like a micro Grand Tourer, if that makes sense. This is a car you can take on long road trips. It's comfortable and it gets really, really good gas mileage. Now, Jim tells me that he gets around 37 to 39 in the winter. He's starting the car up, so it's just idling for a while before he drives it, and winter conditions you just tend to get not as good mileage. Maybe you have some more decent tires on there, whatever it may be. In the summer, he says he consistently gets rear I want to say rear wheel drive. Oh my goodness. Real world driving. I'm going to keep that in there because this is Janky AF when we do a Janky. 40 miles per gallon in the real world. There we go. So that's pretty darn good. In America, getting 40 miles to the gallon for real in actual driving is pretty darn good. And he says on long road trips, he gets, you know, he can get up to 42, 43 miles per gallon. And that's very good considering that a lot of hybrid cars actually do better in the city than they do on the highway. And that's because of the hybrid systems where the engine is shutting on and off and you're getting more battery power when you're just cruising around town, when you're stopping and starting. And that's what kills your mileage on a gas-powered car usually. As we make a little turn here. So, excellent fuel economy. It's obviously a very small car, and it is sporty. Now, it's not fast. It's what some guy told me about my Fiat one time. It's a bit of a gutless wonder, and we're going to put it into sport mode right now. And it actually has this funny feature where it has a Sport Plus button. It's just like in Mario Kart when you get the little, is it the mushroom or whatever it is, when you punch it and it makes you go faster. So Sport Plus is ready on our dashboard. We're going to punch the gas and hit Sport Plus at the same time. So here we go. Yeah. So that was, you know, it's not the fastest. There's just no way of getting around that. And because it has this CVT, this continuously variable transmission, you're not even getting like a torque converter that's like banging gears for you. It gives you all that it has, but it's not a very rewarding or satisfying grunt that it gives you or shove that it gives you. That being said, it'll get up to speed, and I do think the handling of this car is quite nice. Now, as we you know, turn it back and forth here, test out the suspension, it's got really nice turn in. I feel like it has very little body roll. The seats are very nice. They give you support. It's very comfortable, and it does handle well. And because you're in this little sort of capsule, you do get the sporty driving experience. I just think it does leave something to be desired. Now, I believe you could tune this car. I believe these Mugen versions that I talked about were getting upwards of 500-600 horsepower. So I think underpowered cars, especially like my Fiat X19, there's always something you can do, and there's always something, if you have an engineering mind or even just in the aftermarket, there's usually something you can do to make these cars more powerful, and that gets us into price. And when this car came out, it was around $20,000, and this is a 2016, the last year they made it. They ran from around 2012, 2016 in the US market. So still a fairly new car, and you can find these all day for $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 now. So, and even with a $20,000, $21,000 starting base price, it was a very affordable car. So I think you just have to keep that in mind. You have to reframe your expectations. So it did offer a 6-speed manual transmission, which is really cool. It does harken back to that CRX, but I don't think that's really the way that we should look at this car. I think we should look at this car as an extremely economical car that, you know, has some sportiness to it. I love that it's a hatchback. I love that it has these weird, it's supposedly a 2+2, but when you flip the rear little bench thing down, there's just these like hollow inserts where a seat should be. There's no seat belts, there's no seats. It makes it a point, of course, of telling you that there's no seat belts or seats. But when you do fold that thing down, you actually have quite a bit of space back there. And with the hatchback, and I love this hatchback, the rear glass is sitting almost horizontal. It's almost completely flat, like it almost is. Sorry, I'm going to whip through this turn here real quick because it's a fun turn to take. It really is almost like a shooting brake. Now, I know it's a hatchback, so it is a shooting brake, but you just have to look at it and see it. And you have to see this car in person to really appreciate its styling. I love the styling of this car. And for me, you know, I'm much more, it's sad to say, I'm a lot into styling. Performance, I'm not a race car driver. I maybe don't understand, you know, all the specifics of how a car drives and what really makes a car drive. I can't instantly hop in a car and tell you what suspension is in it and stuff like that. But, you know, I have a sense of how things drive, driven quite a few cars now, and it's fun to drive. That's all I can tell you. And, you know, I've mentioned, and I completely admit that the power is just not there. But I think if you're willing to set that aside and just see this as an extremely economical car that is far more unique than anything else the market had to offer at the time, or really since then, it's a gem, you know? And I think, like I said, these are sort of starting to get their due. I think people are starting, you see lots of reviews of these now, and 10 years on is sort of when you can really start to evaluate a car anyways. And it remains a very, very unique car and a great car, I think. The interior, very nice, very strange. The center console here, the gauge cluster, it feels like you're staring into a vortex. It looks like you're looking into like another universe, especially because it's always turning blue and green to let you know like how aggressive or not aggressive you're driving, how much mileage you're getting. And the rest of the interior, it's like this weird collage effect where it feels like they designed the interior and then they slapped down a couple pieces on top of that, and then they slapped down a couple pieces on top of that, and even within your gauges and little tiny dials, there's things that have more things slapped on top of each other. So it has this incredible, strange layering effect going on, which, although it looks maybe a little awkward, a little clunky, overall, very, very nice. And I like its commitment to this use of angles, and it's got this weird duality of a ton of angles and then a ton of circles. You have your little circle door latch here, your circular speakers, your circular dials, but then all sorts of sort of triangles and weird cut angles. I think the Toyotas and Scions from just a little after that were doing a very similar thing. And overall, I think it works quite well. It's classic Honda here, very nice steering wheel. I will say the steering wheel, it's nice and small. It's a fairly large centered thing here with your airbag, but that doesn't really bother me. Now it does have some paddle shifters on it. It has a Bluetooth wireless calling, which is pretty nice, although it's a 2016, so pretty much run of the mill for that time period. Now, in a Sport again, and Sport Plus. Very weird, very weird. So it takes a while, but you really can build up some speed, and what I like about it when you start getting up there, it does feel very, very solid. The growl of the engine, again, because it's a CVT, it'll bring you up to the red line, but then it doesn't really shift. It just like doesn't have any power, so it kind of goes down and then kind of goes back up again. It is sort of like a lackluster power experience because the power isn't, it should be in theory because it's a CVT, it's linear as linear gets, but despite that, it doesn't really feel like that. So as I was saying, this car's happy place is just cruising, going 55, 60, making commutes. It's relatively quiet in here. It's a comfortable place to be. My leg is resting up against this this sort of grab bar door handle, which I could see being a little strange over time. But other than that, very, very comfortable driving experience. The seats are quite supportive, yet if you want to lean it back a little and just go into sort of cruise mode, it's very good for that. And it's a Honda, so all the materials are very nice. This is like sort of the triple black. I think black's a fantastic color for this car. And we're just cruising along. Again, just if you appreciate quirkiness, you almost have to appreciate this car despite its shortcomings, because the doors are insanely long, which you get on a lot of two-door cars. The doors must be half the length of this total car, and you see the wheels far in the back, almost like a smart car. So it's got these like sort of very, very funky proportions. The exterior styling, the front is strange because it just looks like the hood line is like too high, and it doesn't even look like it has to really contain that much underneath. It's not a really, really big engine under there. And actually with the motor system in there, the electric motor, it's still quite compact and tidy in there. But you can see this hood line come up and then like sort of triangulate back where the mirror goes and then come far back into the hatchback. So it's almost like they had to sort of like figure out a way to deal with that sort of discontinuity between the hood line and the rest of the car. I find the back of this car to be extremely sexy. These bulges, these arches in the back. I think it's one of the best rear ends of any car I've seen, in the last 20 years. I think it's, and it was getting into that point of styling where things were becoming like a little overdone and a little angular and like a lot of like swoops and lines, but I think this car pulls it off as best as any. I love how the hatchback sort of like, comes down and then squats really, really wide. Like for how short this car, the rear end is extremely wide. And I just think it's a really, really great looking car. I think it's aged well. And I think in the styling department, certainly it does, bring to mind the look of the CRX. So it's done a good job of like modernizing that look while still paying proper homage to it. Because it's such a weirdly styled car, you really do feel that on the inside because it's so small, and yet you have all this space in the back, but you still feel like you're sitting quite far rear. The windshield is extremely raked. My girlfriend Julia hates raked windshields, and I can't imagine she would love this car because you have this like kind of tiny little window despite how like long in front of you everything is. This A-pillar here is so far in front of you, and yet if you're getting out to like turn or try to look behind you, if you're backing up, you find your head hitting it. So there are quite like awkward proportions, but that being said, you feel pretty cocooned in here, but I wouldn't say it's claustrophobic at all. And you do have this, you're very aware of this like little hatchback behind you. Rear visibility is not great, but I will say your wing mirror visibility is excellent. You really have a good idea of sort of what's beside you and what's behind you, even if you don't have a great idea of the size of the car. Like I said, backing up is like a little strange in this car, but I would imagine like any car, after a while you get quite used to it and you get a sense of the proportions and everything else. So I just think it's a fantastic car. It's a great car. Again, I think you have to look at it like a micro Grand Tour. This is a car that you can use every day. It can be a great daily driver. You're going to get excellent mileage. And if you don't really need to take a lot of other people with you, it's great for having stuff inside the car. Jim owns a bookstore, and shout out to Green Toad Bookstore. If you're in the area, go buy some literature from him. He can fit boxes of books in here. He can fit anything he needs in here to take his little commute to and from work every day. And it's extremely, extremely practical despite being a very small car. So we'll test out the turning circle, as the British say, or the turning radius, as we say. Excellent turning circle. Now here's where this, when you're looking backwards to try to turn around, even though you have this long door, it's all in front of you. So the rear 3/4 visibility, not great. You kind of have to get all the way around to see what's coming. But that being said, excellent turning circle. And this is only the third manual transmission hybrid car that Honda made. So you had the Honda Insight, of course, that legendary car, and then you had the Honda Civic hybrid, which I believe also had a manual transmission, and then this. And I think in addition to being seen as sort of the follower and succession to the CRX, I think this is almost much more of a comparable car to the original Insight. And if they had called it an Insight, who knows, it may have even been more successful because people were thinking more in terms of mileage than performance. And it's amazing what marketing and what setting expectations in people's heads will do, because they won't look at it as what it is, they'll look at it as what they want it to be, or what they wished it to be, or what it was sold to them as. So I think if you look at this car as sort of the successor to the Insight, especially because it did offer that 6-speed manual transmission, then it really finds its element, then it really finds its groove, because I feel like this is the type of car where if you want to talk about performance, you're not trying to get performance out of it insofar as how fast can it accelerate. You're trying to get performance out of it in terms of how many miles to the gallon can you get. And hypermiling, especially when that Insight first came out, was like a real thing. People would sort of like tailgate tractor trailers to try to get slip resistance and see how much mileage they could get out of the car. And that would be the fun performance challenge for me with a car like this, is how good mileage can you get out of this thing. In addition to sport mode, it does have normal mode and econ mode. You can pop it into econ, it just like kind of kills your acceleration. But the funny thing is, Jim told me he drives it in normal mode all the time, and he gets better mileage in normal mode than he does in econ mode, which is kind of hilarious. So you just pop it in normal mode. Now you do have your paddle shifters here. You can downshift, and maybe that's actually what I should have been doing when I was trying to test out the little Super Mario Kart button. But the paddle shifters, while they are nice, they're nice and small. They're right on your steering wheel, so they move with you while you turn. I don't find that they're, you know, super useful. I wouldn't use them too much. I think I would just sort of pop it into automatic and cruise. Your shifter is a very, very strange item. It's got like a pistol grip function, and it does feel rather light. It feels a lot like the Honda Fits, where it, you know, just has like a certain lack of heaviness or weight to it. That being said, it pops into gear very nicely, just like any Honda, and it does have an extremely fun ergonomic design to it. I think it is a nice piece of design here, and it feels really nice in your hand, and that's very important to me. I actually put a lot of emphasis into how the shifter feels, even in an automatic transmission, because it's just like a you know, very central tactile element of the car that you're going to be dealing with. So that's about all I got for the Honda CR-Z. You know, as we do on Janky AF, we blather a lot, we waffle a lot, and shooting this review has been as tough as any I've ever done, because I just have so much to say about this car. I'm so enthusiastic about this car, and while the power is obviously maybe not what you'd hope for, I think if you just shift your frame of reference and you shift the how you think about this car, then it truly becomes something really, really great. And I'm glad to say that after having, you know, gone for a little jaunt in it, I can see what the appeal is. And I can overlook its deficiencies and really appreciate it for the positives and for its strong points. And on top of all that, it's just beautiful to look at, and it's probably still a great car to bring to a Cars and Coffee, especially if you have a manual version of it. But like I said, and this is the first in a long, what I hope to be a long series of classic automatics, a playlist that I'm starting. And I think that classic cars that have an automatic transmission rather than a manual transmission, especially ones that were offered with a manual, are sort of like sort of an uncovered niche of the automotive world. So this is a classic automatic, and I think this is one of the many cars right at the top of the list of cars with an automatic transmission. Even though a manual is option, that a automatic is I don't want to say the preferred version, but certainly you're not losing anything by having an automatic in this car. Again, to beat you over the head with it, because I think this is a car that should be seen as one that its performance is more in the economical, you know, department, rather than, you know, how fast can it go in a straight line department. So that is the review of the Honda CR-Z. Thanks so much to Jim for letting us take this little bubby out. I went and got it to the car wash for him. We'll see if it looks clean at all when I get out. And thanks so much for watching if you've made it till the end here. This is Janky AF. We're a growing young channel. Just hit 200 subscribers. Very proud of that. And we're trying to march towards 1,000 subscribers and monetization. So if you enjoyed this video, you know, it's like flipping a bum a quarter on the street. You know, it makes you feel a little bit better, and maybe, you know, that little quarter will go towards buying him something that can improve his life too. So we would love if you'd subscribe and comment on this video and tell us what you think. And if you didn't like it, that's fine. Let us have it. Let us have all your trolling vitriol. We can handle it here. So again, Janky do thanky, and until next time, Janky do thanky.
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.